That's a hard question. It seemingly changes every day. If I were to sum it up in a nutshell, I'd want people to know that I care. And I care in ways that is personally sacrificial. I get invested in other people's needs, other people's causes. So if there was just anything that I would have on an epitaph, and I was reduced to 10 letters or less, it would read, I cared. I presently serve as the interim pastor for the Church of the Covenant in New York City. It's a mission church that was established around 1866, and it's been continually in existence since then. I've been in the ministry since 1997. That's when I changed professions and left the law. I practiced law from 1984 until 1997. And I was involved in public interest litigation. So it was a natural segue to go into ministry because that defined my practice. When I was in the law, I tended to represent causes over and above people, and that's not a good business model. I was a private attorney and was a little bit too invested in the causes and realized that I was doing ministry over and above the law. Before that, I'd worked briefly in government. I grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in a poor family, 9 siblings on public assistance, and not having a whole lot except the love of a parent, the love of a community. And so that really had a lot of influence on just ambitions. We knew how important it was to serve the greater good, because if the greater good improved, so did the plight of the whole community. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was being sewn into my reality, and that's been a common thread throughout my vocation, throughout college. I attended Cornell University. I later went on to New York Law School, and my last formal education was at Princeton Theological Seminary. I am married. I've been married since 1984, so I'm a veteran of marriage with 3 adult children who I am very, very proud of. And I believe some of my core values have just uh, fallen off on them. They are those apples that don't fall too far from the tree. So I think that they all have a heart for service and a commitment to the larger cause, to the common good. They've done that, throughout their college careers and now do it in their professional careers. So that's the long-winded answer to I care. From my grandmother. My grandmother was the matriarch, and all that she got over the course of her life, she passed down. And that became a foundation for the other things that became part of my education, if you will. My grandmother had little formal education. She migrated from the South, was a generation or so removed from chattel slavery. And she was part of a cultural situation where women were the matriarch of the family, but didn't have a whole lot of other existence. But in that role as matriarch, they had the responsibility to pass down wisdom. And that's where I believe a lot of it came from. She probably had no plans for her children or grandchildren to pursue formal education. It was just to stay out of trouble. And if we could get through our life not getting into trouble, she would have been very, very, very happy. So when I came around to graduate from high school as the first of 40 grandchildren she had, that was a small miracle. And then on top of that, I went on to college and graduated from college. And so that was an incredible achievement for my grandmother. She never really said how important it was to her, but the day of my graduation, when I was handed my diploma, after I got down from the stage, when I was back with my family, she took my diploma, ran to the campus store, and had it laminated on wood. The significance of that, as a clergy person, it just kind of gives me visions of Moses descending from the mountain with the tablets, that she wanted this achievement carved in stone as best she could accomplish so that no one could take that away. And that became the foundation, the basis. Being from the South, a lot of the wisdom is communicated in just short sentences, if you will. For example, someone might say, well, if you keep quiet, people may not know what you're thinking, but you can never be misquoted. And so many other pearls of wisdom that she would pass on. And then there is an intersectionality of that with the formal education, a type of reframing, reorganizing, reordering those type of sayings into a different articulation that might make sense for the professions, for the vocations, for the pursuits, for the ministries in which I am a part. And so I may articulate it different, but it's that same basic ageless wisdom. And I attribute it to my grandmother. My mother was very, very instrumental as well in communicating the wisdom that she had received from my grandmother. So I got it from two sides, the same wisdom coming from two sides. So they made sure it sunk in. My vision for peace is not really articulable in words. It's an experiential reality, but it is reality. It may seem very, very amorphous, and it is kind of fluid because the point that you try to wrap your head around it, you miss the whole thing. This moment that we're having in conversation, this is peace. This is peace because there is a mutual growth that's coming through this experience, this engagement. And that's an important part of the vision for peace. It's not about the absence of a conflict. We have no right, no obligation to be in conflict with one another. But we do have a moral and a spiritual right to affirm and raise up one another. And that becomes the individual vision and the collective vision. That is a vision for the world, a world that is sustaining and uplifting the plight of all humanity, no matter where we are, no matter how much or how little we have to contribute. All of those contributions go to the greater good, to the greater uplift. It may not always be measurable quantitatively, but qualitatively, it's real. How do you measure a smile, someone just giving you a smile that's unexpected. That's peace. How can you measure someone just giving you a hand when that hand was unexpected? I can borrow some of the language that my children use, and I really like this. Maybe it's part of the millennial speak, but they say for just random, random reasons, random things, that peace is random. It is the projection forward of a moral obligation that may begin with the spiritual force, the spiritual deity, regardless of what your religion is. It comes from outside and it's lived out through a type of randomness that provides positive growth and experience for those that you come in touch with, that you're connected with, places where you are, given the privilege to work or to lead and do those things, to a world that you are privileged to live in, to know that my condition is connected with the condition of every other person on the world at this time. That's a huge obligation. And that is the vision, to know that everything I do, every breath I take, every bit of energy that I expend, it has some meaning, some purpose. And that is my vision for peace. It is purposeful living that benefits the common good. It would be somewhat a bit of hubris on my part to say, what do people need to do? I can only, fully claim what I need to do, because I'm not going to be disappointed or allow myself to be disappointed in the failure of other people, other communities, other nations to not reach or live up to my standard. But I would hope that my living would be an example that could motivate people to do likewise. That the things that I do can be received in such a way that it's not just received in kind, but the person receiving it will take it to the next level and then pass it on, that they will pass it forward. And so that becomes part of it, the hope, as opposed to the expectation, is that we are able to experience that type of peace. And it's so profound that we can't wait to pass it on, and pass it on in such a way that it makes moral claims, it makes ethical claims, it makes legal claims that we resolve to adhere to in partnership. Peace is not something I can obligate or hold you to. That is a very, very sophisticated form of parochialism or oppression. I can't make my kids love one another or behave towards one another in peace, but I can model behavior. And in the modeling of that behavior, it becomes important to their growth and development. They will imitate that behavior. And I believe that my wife and I have been very, very successful in not making a claim on my children to do this or do that, but to model behavior in such a way that they will not just simply embrace it, feel very, very validated by it, and it overflows such that they will model that behavior as well. I learned from the parents of my children's friends and colleagues that they are good friends to have. And I think it's the result of their modeling, of our modeling behavior that they have imitated, and they now model it as well. They all tend to have very, very long term friends. They have very, very diverse friends. And so they're able to take those lessons outside of a cloistered community of particularity in terms of ethnicity, particularity in terms of nationalism, particularity in terms of gender, and then be an example for a very, very broad variety of others, and including the parents of those that they touch. So that would be a hope as opposed to just what are my expectations. I just hope, I hope that you are able to be all that the Lord has produced you to be. And in the being of that all, it's going to so sufficiently overflow that you're going to inspire others to be just as good or better as an individual, as a community. Within our community, we form something called the Interfaith Community Bridge. And in so doing, it was to bring disparate groups that often do not agree about theology or even whether or not there is a God, because we had atheists as part of that group, but to bring people in conversation before there is a crisis. And when we did have a crisis, we had a crisis in 2013 when Hurricane Sandy came. It shut down the power for most of the community. There were a few places that had power, and many of the few were faith communities, religious institutions. But the institutions had been in conversation with each other and had been in conversation with the community at large. The school superintendent reached out to the faith communities to ask if the space could be used for instruction to continue. And as a result, we lost very few days, if any, of educational instruction time, although most of the community did not have power. So it just flows out and flows through in that way and impacts upon the needs of the larger community, and 99.9% of the beneficiaries of that I did not know and will never come to know. But out of that vision came something that provided of just continuity for a community. And maybe one of those children will grow up to be a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Maybe one of those children will grow up to be the president of the United States, and they can then turn those values into policy that can impact on the world in positive ways. Who knows? Peace consciousness. This is my opinion and my opinion alone. Peace consciousness is to move the whole conversation of peace outside of the realm of right and wrong. Because if it is in the realm of right and wrong, there becomes a dualism. I don't believe that there can be a dualism about peace, that we can't have dual conscious and be an instrument of value. And so the conscious, the whole area of conscience, I believe, is to collapse that dualism into a single reality that we can embrace as a vision without it being on any scale of relativity. That's what I believe conscious is. It is the collapse of any thought of right and wrong into a single construct of right. And in that single construct of right, I believe peace resides there. But it's a difficult journey because we often think in a relativistic and a dualistic way. We see peace in terms of conflict. And so we define peace as the absence of the thing that we abhor. But we don't know what we really want. Not knowing that suggests to me the absence of connecting the idea of peace with conscience. When it reaches that point, when it reaches that level, there is a kind of harmony, a synergy, that we are able to connect on levels that we never thought possible. We are able to become greater than the sum of our individual parts. And so I cannot, in conscience, have peace in the absence of you or the other having it. And so that's what I think is the idea of conscience. It is the collapse of dualism into a single reality. It is that vision of Hosanna. It is that vision where we can all sing together in perfect harmony. And even though we may be singing different notes, even in our full diversity, it doesn't create a sense of dualism, relativity. It doesn't create hierarchy, but it creates a vision where we become beyond ourselves and greater than the sum of our parts. And that's where, for me, conscience is. Conscience is not something that's within. The energy to pursue it is within. But conscience is so wholly without that I have to come fully the other. And when I become fully the other, then when we have a conversation, there is no point counterpoint, but there becomes a single sense of right. We're not talking about right or wrong, but we are talking about right. And in that conversation of right just increases. It's not diminished by any thought of wrong. It just increases and increases into a continuum of infinite right. I hope I haven't been too abstract with that, but that's the conscience. It's that infinite right that is in no way polluted by any even thought of wrong. Bruce Lee had a concept about his martial arts, and that it would flow like water. And the power of water is it takes the shape of the vessel that it's in. But because it's in that vessel, that's not what water looks like. And so we may mistake water for the shape of the vessel rather than free it from the vessel so that water can take the shape that it is, and peace. Remove from the vessel, from the thought, from the opinion, from the interest of the vessels who articulate the need for peace. When it is free from that, then peace can take on a shape or no shape of the peace that it really is. And again, I have a tendency to lean towards the abstract, but I think that there is a concrete place and reality in that. That's the whole point of visioning. And as a Christian, our wisdom teachings are that without vision, the people perish. And it's otherwise translated is absent being connected to a higher good, the people will cast off restraint. And that higher good is not a dualism, but it is a single reality of the perfect peace. As a Christian, we connect with Jesus Christ as that perfect peace. And so we do not give a part, but we give that whole. And in giving that whole, we have now collapsed that abstract thought into an operational reality, so that what is wholly mine is wholly yours. What are your needs are my needs. And we survive as one. We live together as created human beings, or we risk in the realm of dualism perishing as fools. And we see that happening on the news all the time. We see the type of conflicts happening around the world. And two sides are in conflict, but they're both saying that they want peace. How can that be? But it is. I believe that it comes about because of the way in which we do approach it leaves room for us to disagree. And when there is not room for that disagreement, but the ability to elevate the level of agreement, then we have elevated the whole human condition. Any words of wisdom? I think be committed to the you that you've been created to be. Be so committed that it can inspire others to want to participate in the you, that you can equally be inspired to want to participate in the other for the generations that are to come. Approach this with a humble spirit. Know that you don't have the answers, but you have an infinite amount of questions that you are free to ask. If you believe you have the answers, you may cut off the willingness to inquire. We learn more from the questions than we do the answers. And so inquisitiveness, the desire to inquire, the willingness to ask, it allows for learning, for growth, for opportunities. Ask why. Why is there conflict in the Ukraine? And don't settle for an easy answer. Don't settle for the information that is provided before you even ask the question. Have that vision. As an attorney, we learn to to not ask a question that we don't already have an answer for. That is great practice as an advocate, but it can really kind of inhibit one's growth as a human being. And so think and act outside of the box. That is you. Just be so fully convinced that you have been created for a purpose, that you can pursue that in ways that will just leave you unbound. And I don't know if that's making sense, but in our living, we make compromises. In my marriage, for many years, it was about compromise. And I think it stunted both my growth and my wife's growth because we were not being fully who God created us to be. And once we found that place and that space, the relationship has taken off. The relationship has reached heights that we never expected it would for a marriage. It's produced fruit that we never expected it would. And so for the emerging generations, know who you are and don't compromise to be something that you are not just to accommodate. Don't accept that absence of conflict is the presence of peace, but pursue the possibilities of peace so fully that those that you are around, those that you are with, those that you can hold accountable will pursue the same pathway that you do. No pun intended, there needs to be pathways to peace. And in those pathways, we need to have a common destination because we will often be traveling different roads. But in that common destination, even if we are on different roads, we know that we will move to a place where once we meet there, we know that we've arrived. And so for the generations to come, if there's any particular wisdom, that's my wisdom. I've put on a lot more words to it than my grandmother would have. Maybe education has corrupted my mind, my thinking. It's made things a bit too abstract. My grandmother gave me very, very simple wisdom that I took into college, took into law school, took into theological studies. Her advice was do right by people. 3 words. Dropped me off at college and said, do right by people. Was there when I started law school and graduated, and she repeated herself and said, do right by people. She was not there when I graduated from seminary and went into the ministry, but her lessons had been so persistent that by the time I dedicated my life to the service of others, the full service of others in vocational ministry, I already had that core value that my grandmother had passed on to me. And so for the people to come who are hearing this, you can ignore everything else that I said. And if I were to give an elevator speech and we were only traveling 1 floor, I would say, do right by